Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Wednesday, April 5th, 2017. We are in room 1060 for all of you out there in the audience. City Hall, it is 1 p.m., 1:06, and this is the Housing Committee. We have a special item, and we're ready to begin. We have quorum?
Yes, sir.
Yep, okay.
Mr. Chair, now be a time for...
Koretz is here, and Mr. Marquise Harris-Dawson. Let's hear public comment to start off. Antonia Ramirez and Herman. Both comments? Okay. Okay. Mr. Herman, you want to come up? You've got a couple of minutes.
Start the clock.
Mr. Ramirez, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
please
you.
go ahead.
Number one,
Herman, you want to come up, please?
thank you. The Rent Stabilization Ordinance, the RSO, has been used as another form of subsidy to all criminal, illegal, racist, hate-mongering wetbacks and Chango Latino gangbangers, among other illegal refugees who are involved in criminal activities here in America. I wish you could have done or expounded on the Ellis Act, maybe in a one-liner or two-liner. That would have done wonders for many of us. But again, and now I would like, is this part of public comments or? Okay. Stop the homeless racketeering by bogus criminal Nigerian Christian pastors, Chu Wong and Grace Pam, and Florence Akuchie, who negligently and vindictively operate in Ocean Property Transitional Shared Room Housing in South Central Los Angeles. These unethical pastors put Jessica Emmanuel Bassi, a bulldog, as a house manager, and what she has done is incite daily violence, theft, criminal acts of vandalism to our property, and illegal entry. I'm sorry, did we say we get 2 minutes or 1 minute?
General public comment and item
I
one.
only got 1 minute and then
Together.
I only got 1 minute right now.
2 minutes.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And so the daily harassment of shouting, yelling threats and toxic loud noise lights and all day and night. Furthermore, these corrupted bogus Christian pastors deliberately stick criminal female felons with active drug abuse and committing theft, i.e. Yolanda Jackson. She often says, I'm going to kill you, bitch. This is supposed to be a Christian home. Jessica Emmanuel Bassi, along with Ebony Burries, Yolanda Jackson, Robin Taylor, and all the African-American and Nigerian Africans have committed these daily crimes, not only to me, but to other non-black residents. This is why we have called the LAPD Southeast Division for help. Again, we have called the Southeast LAPD Division for help because the pastors have not helped us. They've been vindictive and they give a rat's ass about our safety, habitability, privacy, and peaceful and quiet enjoyment. Now I believe that the African Americans and Nigerians cause crimes against non-blacks. It's not just in East LA where the Latinos cause it against blacks. It is now blacks against Latinos and others. Thank you. God bless America and Donald Trump.
Mr. Herman.
Now that we're talking about modifying rent stabilization regarding the enforcement of the Elias Act, I got one good thing to say. Fuck you. HHH, JJJ, Measure H, all these bitch propositions, and you stupid schmuck still can't get together housing. How fucking dare you insult all of us here in the city of Los Angeles and raise the fucking taxes one more time, another half cent. Let me tell you something, brother, as you put it, on item 23 of this morning's agenda, ad hoc committee on immigrant affairs. Fuck your sanctuary city. I plan to tell the Trump administration to investigate the issue under the general purpose of city attorney's reports on the Elias Act. Let me stay on topic. Goddamn niggers interrupt everybody, huh? So now that I'm on topic, and this is general public comment, fuck you. Fuck you. You hear that, Harrison? It's people in your community that suffer because you take advantage of them. A few couple of things you do for them, and that's about it. But many African Americans are showing their true colors. How? By your actions of leaving them homeless on the street. American people living on the street because of a sanctuary city. Fuck you. We don't need sanctuary city here. First, put Americans in ad hoc homes and housing before you commit to giving fucking wetbacks the first initiative in homes. See, you don't like to hear from a man because I'm talking like an hombre, con huevos putos. And I'll say to you, Mr. Peppa Pig, putting people out of homes in that big high rise to convert it into a mansion. Some fucking old people don't need that new shit. They're comfortable with what they have because they're gonna die. People have to die, motherfucker, but not die in a way that you throw them out in the street, you fucking Jew, like you killed Jesus Christ, an innocent man, over 33 denaries. Fuck you. Hey, Mr. Price, welcome. For the record.
Mr. Price, welcome to reality.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I-
We're going to,
I think we have some visitors here that have not been to a council meeting before and are probably baffled at what they're hearing, but we've lost a couple cases in the past, and it is clear that we're not able to rein in some of the absolutely reprehensible things that we have heard here today. So we're not shocked, but anyone that's new to this committee or the city hall. Excuse me.
out of order. This closes public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, would you like?
General public comment is next. It was multiple items.
Okay.
So general public comment. You have a general public comment speaker. Yeah.
Todd?
That's it.
Yes, sir.
My name's
Welcome.
Todd. Hi. I'm very new to this. First time in City Hall in 20 years. I have been renting that whole time, 18 years, and have been subject to the RSO rent increases, which is 3% a year, which seems fair with inflation being a normal 3% per year. There has recently been a provision added to that of 1% when the landlord pays gas and 1% when the landlord pays electricity. The problem with that is that it compounds every year, so that if my rent's $1,000 and I get a 1% increase because the landlord pays the gas, that's $10 a month. It's not a big deal, but it goes into the rent, so that the next year a new $10 gets added on, and the next year a new $10 gets added on, and it keeps compounding. And year after year, it's no longer $10. Now it's $10.50. Now it's $11. I did some research with the LADWP. The yearly average for my building is $150 for the gas bill. So within 10 years' time, I mean, I'm paying the entire building's gas. So it doesn't really seem logical to have that compounded. If it were a separate fee, you pay $10 a month because the landlord pays gas, but it keeps compounding.
Thank you, Todd.
Okay. Is there some way to find out how that provision was added?
You can talk to staff after the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, item 1,
Yes.
City Attorney report and ordinance modifying the rent stabilization ordinance in order to strengthen provisions relating to the enforcement of the Ellis Act and the preservation of RSO units.
Yes. Can we have housing come up in the CA? Please join us. How are you?
Good afternoon, council members.
Thank you.
Deputy City Attorney.
Can you bring the microphone?
Is that better? Okay. Deputy City Attorney Robert Moore, and we are here to present a draft ordinance to amend sections 151.09 and 151.22 through 151.28 of the LAMC to modify and strengthen the city's Ellis Act provisions of the RSO. Pursuant to Council's direction, the amendments address 8 aspects of the current LAMC Ellis Act provisions. First, they clarify that the Ellis Act provisions apply to all rental units, whether occupied or are vacant at the time of withdrawal from the residential rental market. Second, they require owners to restart all Ellis Act requirements if a previously withdrawn rental unit is subsequently re-rented. Third, it requires owners to file annual property status reports related to the withdrawal of rental units with each CID. Fourth, it clarifies that where RSO units have been demolished, but the owner did not previously comply with the Ellis Act requirements, that all replacement rental units are subject to the RSO. Fifth, it complies with state law allowing the city to file constraints with the county recorder's office. Six, it complies with state law prohibiting the withdrawal of residential hotel units. Seventh, it requires owners to provide relocation assistance services to tenants, including those that otherwise might not be entitled to relocation benefits. And eight, it requires owners seeking exemption from the RSO replacement provisions to execute a regulatory agreement guaranteeing for a term of 55 years either accommodations that are affordable for low or very low households at or below 80% of the area median income as established by California Department of Housing and Community Development, or a number of affordable units equal to the number of RSO units withdrawn, whichever is greater. The draft ordinance has been prepared by the City Attorney's Office in consultation with HCID, and we are here and able to address any questions any of you council members may have. Thank you.
Colleagues? Mr. Kretz? Yes, sir.
Well, I don't have any questions. I'm just glad to see these amendments coming back in ordinance form. Both Chairman Cedillo and myself introduced motions to strengthen the rent stabilization ordinance back in 2015, and we both recognize the need to improve the way we handle Ellis cases. And I think dealing with the more fundamental flaws of Ellis will have to be done working with the state legislature, and we've begun doing that. But this ordinance deals with the things that we can do, and I'm excited that it's come to this committee and would encourage an aye vote.
Mr. Price?
No comments. That is moving forward. An issue that's impacts lots of families.
Okay. Well, let's hear from public comment. Sophia. Sophia, please come up. Let's hear from Armando Flores and Marie Ramsey. Marie Ramsey. Okay.
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay. Hi, my name is Sofia Guerra. I'm from the Coalition for Economic Survival. The Ellis Act undermines our ability to effectively address our housing crisis. It's resulted in over 22,000 rent-controlled units lost here since 2001. CES supports these amendments, such as the new RSO replacement requirements, requiring owners to restart the Ellis process if they re-rent, ensuring vacant units are covered, providing the relocation services to all tenants and the rest. But much more is needed. The city must use its land use powers to preserve RSO units, restricting the small lot subdivision ordinance, capping condo conversions and demolitions are other steps that should be taken. The city should also be supporting AB 982, which extends the one-year Ellis notice to all tenants. It's time for a bold action, and that action is needed now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Armando Flores with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. VICA opposes the timing of this ordinance considering the host of new costs such as JJJ and the pending linkage fee being hoisted on housing development. Now is not a prudent time to make building housing in Los Angeles even more difficult. VICA opposes this amendment to the rent stabilization ordinance. The change in language requiring those building housing to provide a one-to-one RSO replacement or 20% of all newly constructed units to be set aside as affordable housing from whichever is less to whichever is greater places a disproportionate burden on large projects seeking to provide Los Angeles with affordable housing. This change will stop projects from penciling out and thus stop projects from being built. LA needs more housing, both market rate and affordable, not more cost to build housing. Additionally, this amendment leaves out workforce housing with narrow income restrictions, failing to meet the much-needed demand for affordable housing for our teachers, firefighters, and police officers, and focusing on low-income housing, which has been addressed by multiple initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Marie Rumsey, and I'm here on behalf of the Central City Association. And we're asking that you continue this ordinance today for 30 days in order to answer some of these questions that still need to be answered. Number one, this is a significant shift in policy, and I don't think we've done enough to address what its impacts will be on large projects that are perhaps taking 10 RSO units off the market and then replacing them with a 300-unit building. That'll be a significant impact on a new project that wasn't expected. Number two, what is the vesting provision in this ordinance? So if you're currently working on a project and you're working under the old rules of the RSO, how are you protected or how are you informed about these changes? So we ask that we answer these questions before we move forward, and thank you for your consideration.
Karen Halleck. Noel Hume. And Carol Citroni.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the Housing Committee. My name is Noel Hyun. I'm an attorney at Liner LLP, and I'm here today to represent my fellow members of the Central City Association, many of whom could not make it here today. As Marie Rumsey previously testified, we're deeply concerned with this significant policy change, given that there are so many unanswered questions. In my daily work, I represent developers with projects in the pipeline who have designed and financed projects based on current laws. It's really critical to add grandfathering language here to protect the pipeline of housing production that we already have in place, and also make sure that we have clear vesting language so that vested projects would also not be subject to this change. Further, I think given the recent case, Coyne versus City and County of San Francisco, we have some serious concerns that this ordinance would not be upheld by the courts. So we ask again that this ordinance be continued for 30 days so we can continue to have a discussion and refine the finer terms. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Halleck. I'm an attorney at Liner LLP. This Section 14 of the proposed ordinance is problematic. In many cases, under the 20% scenario, the required number of affordable units would bear no relationship with the number of rent-stabilized units being withdrawn from the market. Under Coyne v. San Francisco, which is a California Court of Appeal case that just came down last month, the court recently struck down almost identical language, holding that a public entity cannot impose a prohibitive price on an owner's right to withdraw units from the market under the Ellis Act. The proposed exemption also violates the Ellis Act itself, specifically Section 7060.2D mandates that any system of controls on the price of newly constructed units must be fair and reasonable, notwithstanding any exemption. The exemption here would be unworkable and unreasonable for many developers and owners. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Citroni. At this moment, I can send you to dozens of properties where long-term rent-controlled tenancies are being withdrawn and hundreds of people are facing eviction, scrambling to put a roof over the heads of their families. This has reached epidemic proportions, creating chaos in our communities and directly exacerbating the homeless problem. Meanwhile, developers are skirting the law set forth in the Ellis Act and re-renting apartments on Airbnb while waiting for other units to become vacant. I just learned of a case where a renter was not allowed to extend her tenancy. She was not old enough to qualify for the extra time, even though other tenants did qualify and the building could not be completely vacant for a year. The developer, who intends to demolish, made this woman move out in order to Airbnb the apartment. This is happening every day. They know they're breaking the law, but they also know that no one is monitoring the situation. So you need to get this right. You need to fix these problems the right way. It's very important for everybody. While this motion today is a step in the right direction, it falls far short of what is needed. 30 seconds? There must be a further recommendation by this committee to put in place the tools for much greater enforcement when units are illegally re-rented. The Ellis Act has proven to be a mistake, a massive incentive for speculative developers to destroy historic buildings, uproot people's lives, and ravage our communities. We need proper monitoring and enforcement of the Ellis Act while we work in Sacramento to have it overturned. Thank you.
Naomi? John Walton? And Claudia Medina. Thelmy left? Oh, Thelmy? Thelmy, there you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Walt Senderfit from the Los Angeles Tenants Union. As you know, the Ellis Act is one tool that's being used to contribute to the displacement crisis in our city. It's not being used for its original intent to allow people to cash out, but instead as for speculators and developers to get people out from under rent control. These provisions in this ordinance are supportable, but I would strongly disagree with the implication of Councilman Koretz. With all due respect, this does not go to the extent that your bills originally indicated or that many of us have proposed is within your power to close loopholes, to increase enforcement powers, to do what we can to make it, to disincentivize the abuse of Ellis, which is widespread. In our view, this is supportable only if you push it forward with saying this is part one of what part two or later will include, and give yourselves a date certain time frame to come back for a fuller view. We and others have made a number of other suggestions of what is possible to do. I'll pass some of those around to you, that only a few of which were included here.
John. And we have a part two component to this, right?
I would say that you should put it forward to the council that this is only part one.
Yes, that's all right.
Good morning, council members. My name is Telvi Perez. Didn't realize we were on a first name basis, but that's nice. I'm here in support of this ordinance, and I hope it moves forward. It is a great first step. I'm looking forward to seeing the part two. As you know, we have a lot of hard work to do to ensure that the Ellis Act, which is a giant monster that is gobbling up our affordable housing stock, in particular our RSO stock, that it is stopped, or that we can limit it as much as possible. This includes looking at serious limitations or putting an Ellis cap, a cap on the number of units by geographical area that can be approved on a yearly basis. Also looking at restrictions on HSID accepting applications if entitlements are not in place at the time of the application. And also making sure that buildings are not being converted to transient uses like hotels and Airbnb. We are waiting on the report from the Housing Department. We hope that you will help expedite that report. Thank you for your work on this.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claudia Medina. I've been a tenant rights attorney for the past 10 years. I'm an attorney at Eviction Defense Network, where part of my caseload includes suing landlords that Ellis units and then re-rent the units on Airbnb. It's happening a lot, but I want to focus on one thing that the city could work on expanding. Yes, the state imposes limits. Our RSO falls short of those limits. For example, the RSO could demand that a landlord allow a tenant to reinstate their tenancy up to 10 years. And RSO only allows it up to 5 years. Additionally, RSO only requires a landlord to inform a tenant within 2 years of their intent to re-rent, whereas the city could require that the landlord inform the tenant up to 10 years. In LA, between 2 and 5 years, a landlord just has to file an application of intent to re-rent with the city, and no one tells the tenant. No one tells the tenant that within, yeah. Thank you.
Where's the cards? Jennifer Gamata. Is that right? Did I say your name right? You have this laser perfect penmanship. But I know your teachers used to tell you have to write bigger. Beverly Kenworthy and Sylvie Shane.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Jennifer Ganata. I'm an attorney at Intercity Law Center, and I'm here on behalf of the organization to thank you for this is a first step forward. However, we do think that there are different pieces that we would like to have more information about. Specifically, I would agree with the other advocates that have come before me, but I would like to stress the importance of enforcement. And in the event that the landlord does not comply with the Ellis Act requirements, we would like to see what the city is going to do in regards to stopping landlords from abusing their power as using the Ellis Act.
Hi, Beverly Kenworthy with the California Apartment Association. We understand the need to look at RSO properties and try to maintain those, but I think we also need to think about what our housing supply looks like and how RSO units are such a huge part of that. We think Ellis is very important. There are people who don't want to be landlords anymore, and they shouldn't be. It's the only industry, I think, in the world where it says you can't go out of business without doing all of these things. We accept a lot of those things. I think we need some clarification on Section 4 and 13. We believe that under Ellis and Costa Hawkins, it shouldn't apply if the new units were offered for rent more than 5 years later. Then they should be covered under that Ellis exemption. So if the evictions were illegal, if there were all of those things they could be held accountable for, and they're probably be in a lot of trouble for. But if those units weren't, so I think you need to clarify in this ordinance. And then we just think in overall housing policy goals, if you can come up with a formula by talking to actual developers, do we want to lock people into really old housing stock for years on end when we could redevelop to a higher density, create replacement units that actually make sense as opposed to a disincentive? But if a disincentive is what you're going for new housing, this works. So, thank you.
We're going to do that in part 2.
Good afternoon, members of the Housing Committee. My name is Sylvie Shane. I'm a member of the LA Tenants Union and Coalition for Economic Survival. I want to echo the sentiments that I've heard so far in public comment with regards to enforcement. The proposed ordinance is a great first step, but enforcement has always been one of the biggest issues, and the standard that housing has to apply when it's investigating instances of abuse of the re-rental provisions have to meet such a high standard that it's almost impossible for them to actually find that they're that it's meeting that standard. But even when they do, most of the time, if by that point, if the property owner is compliant, there's no subsequent action. So there's not really any kind of mechanism that is de-incentivizing the abuse of the provisions. I've provided recommendations for enforcement that have to do with withdrawing the certificate of occupancy for a property that would then curb the abuse of the reoccupancy abuse either through Airbnb or by purporting that the property owner is not actually renting it. Also, want to echo what Claudia Medina mentioned with regards to the extension to 10 years. I've provided the section in the Ellis law that allows the City Council to extend it to 10 years. And then I want to emphasize the need for right to return in new development projects, which would stem the impacts of displacement and gentrification that has a disparate impact on people of color. Thank you.
Sylvia, that's in our proposal.
The right of return?
Correct. 1 to 1 or 20%, whatever greater.
It returns the units, but not the people. It's the impact to the actual people who are materially affected.
Right.
I didn't.
It's already in the ordinance. It's in the ordinance.
I didn't. Okay. I'll reread it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Enrique Velasquez. Stevie speaking? Stephen Diaz speaking?
Good afternoon, Enrique Velasquez with Inquilinos Unidos. I've been working as a tenant organizer for decades. And in all my decades of work, I don't remember having a housing crisis as the current that we are living in LA. And one of the responsible laws because of this crisis is precisely the Ellis Act. Ellis Act has been used by speculators, by landlords that don't play by the rules. Many cases, they harass people like day and night. They bring, wrongful lawsuits against tenants to desperate tenants, offer them money, when tenants do not know the rights and so on and so on. I think this is a first step in the right direction to do this. But really, I think that this committee can do better by protecting the tenants. Low-income families do not have enough money to pay, what current rents are in the city of LA. Thank you.
Stephen Luffman.
Council members, thank you. That was fast. I just gave my card in. I was also Ellis. It's now almost 2 years ago. And it is a crisis. And I think these reforms are good. I think more has to be done, especially enforcement.
How would you envision that?
Well, there are people maybe are not. I know there are people now living in my unit, which was supposed to be empty. My guess is they're not paying rent, but maybe they're they're just living there as compensation is worth $2,000, $3,000. How can that be allowed? How can if you Ellis a unit, that means it should not be occupied. There has to be something done about that. So I think more has to be done.
All right, thank you. Yes, introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Gianna Martin, and I'm currently a tenant and a member of the LATC, Los Angeles Tenants Union. And I'm also under an Ellis eviction, and I'm fighting an unlawful detainer because I'm trying to remain in the units after being Ellis, and those units were put on the market on Airbnb. They were re-rented in both my building, the neighbor's building. That neighbor also was evicted. She had stage 4 cancer. She's about to die, and her units were re-rented. The other building we found, this was all under Wiseman Residential. He owns over 40 buildings. He has in the stage of buying more. We've found, I'd say about 5 buildings that he's re-rented on Airbnb. We have listings of hundreds more. Those were filed with the HCID, and they were not enforced. 4 or 5 months went by without enforcement. No one came by. And when the investigator finally came by, they were told that they were in compliance, but they weren't. So what I've found is that these buildings are being demolished before investigations are concluded. And before, can I have a couple more seconds? I think it's important to note that the buildings are being demolished before investigations are concluded or before they're held. What we're doing now is we're having civil action lawsuits to try to get settlements, which is the cost of doing business for these developers, and they write it off as a cost of doing business. They settle after the fact, but then those families in those homes, they don't get returned back into their units. So they're actually never getting back into their buildings. And what they do is they settle afterward if they're lucky and if they can afford counsel, and then we have no laws to get them back in, and we have no ways to get them back in, including myself. So we're being pushed out of the units, and then the units are demolished, and we have no laws to keep the buildings up while they're being investigated, or if they're investigated at all. I'm looking at several buildings. 1332 was demolished and never investigated. I've talked to FEAR's office. Our city attorney's office is overwhelmed. My investigator had over 300 cases that were Airbnb alone. So I can sit all day with you guys and tell you what policies I think that we need to enforce, but what we really need to see is a crackdown. My developer told me, and I quote, "I can Ellis these buildings, turn them into offices, and I will not be in violation." This is what we're dealing with. He can Ellis those buildings. He can remove us. He can wait 2 years. He can go out of the rental business. He can put them back on at luxury condos, and he's fine. And he did 2 or 3 illegal demolitions, one in your district and one in District 4. So I've seen 2 or 3 illegal demolitions in District 5 and District 4, and he was stopped 3 times by the city, and he continued to do it. So, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. Many members, tell me how we reconcile the need to develop and the need to protect tenants.
Very complicated.
Any comments? Mr. Koretz?
Well, I would just say I wouldn't want my earlier comments to be misinterpreted that the city had done absolutely everything within its power, although the stronger possibilities to address the Ellis Act are at the state level, but there are still other things that we can and should look into doing here. And there certainly are a number of violations, and one of the things we have to figure out is how we can keep up with all the enforcement issues, because a number of these things are being undertaken in violation, and we clearly don't seem to be able to keep up with it.
Can we get the CA back up? So what I hear is a lot more, the testimony tells me there's an abuse of Alice and a failure to impose consequences rather than a problem with the policy structure, right? What we see is that people proclaim that they're going to utilize Alice and then they completely abuse it. And so people are offended. They call it they're being Aliced. But it's really a question of a lack of compliance of the law and a lack of enforcement of the law. That may be the remedy. How do we do that? The other question, and maybe HC can come up and talk about this as well. It just seems to me that there's a need to reconcile a need to build housing abundantly for all classes of people, Let me state that clearly. At the same time, not allow the efforts to build to displace existing tenants.
So, council members, I think with regard to the enforcement aspects of the present Alice Act provisions, I think with council direction, we can of course explore the various ways that can be instituted to enforce what is already in the LAMC. There are, of course, as Councilmember Koretz noted, various constraints, however, with state law that we will be preempted from going too far, going beyond what the state allows us to do. But with what is in our LAMC, I believe we can explore and then report back, if you wish, on various possible scenarios for further enforcement.
Could you give us, I know we have a rental registry. Can you give us a review of what we're talking about so we can see the magnitude of the problem, how many people are applying to Alice buildings, and then what the impact is on tenants and the number of displacements that are being created. But it seems to me that still that the question here is a question of abuse of Alice, not so much the use of Alice, but rather the abuse of it, and how we prevent that. I don't see that someone who's violating the law then has, can violate the law to position themselves to be advantaged in the market. I don't see that that's the purpose of Alice, and that we should do all that we can to stop that.
I believe HCID may have the answer to your question as far as the number of units and tenants that are impacted by this.
Good afternoon. Anna Ortega, Housing and Community Investment Department. I did bring with me updated charts with numbers of Alice evictions. So this was part of our report last time, but these are updated up through the end of 2016. So from 2001 through 2016, there were almost 22,000 rental units removed from the rental housing market. This is about 3% of the RSO stock, so it's about 0.2% per year. So it's a significant number, but it's over 16 years. So we are getting about 300, a little over 300 applications per year in 2016. Those 338 applications in 2016 for almost 1,400 units. So that's what's filing. Some of the ordinance amendments that are presented today do get at strengthening the enforcement. They eliminate one of the loopholes that you can see on the chart where landlords are LSing vacant units because they think they can avoid some of the LS provisions by getting the unit vacant first. So you can see that we've been tracking that since 2013, and that's one of the things we're fixing here, because it's not just about protecting the tenants, but also preserving those RSO units. You can.
How do you fix it?
This amendment is requiring that the LS provisions apply whether the units are vacant or occupied. And you'll see it's very interesting. In 2016, we actually had more vacant units removed than we had occupied units, which raises the question of how those units became vacant. So that's one of the fixes here. There's a number.
Is this what's being talked about where the representative from Inquilinos Unidos was saying that tenants are being forced out and harassed?
Yes,
so that the building is clear, and then the person tries to take advantage of Alice.
Yes, and then they don't have all the future provisions and restrictions on the replacement units. So we do see different types of constructive eviction going on, and this is one way to address that. There's other fixes here, such as requiring annual reports from property owners so that we can track better what is actually happening. Is it still vacant? Has it been re-rented? If it's been re-rented, there's another provision here that says, it gets stricter about that and says you have to start the whole LS process all over again. So it's, just because you took it off once, if you then turn around and put it back on the rental market, then everything has to start over. The clock starts ticking for the 5 years. You have to reissue the notifications and provide relocation assistance to the tenants. So there are subtle things here that address some of the abuses that we're seeing and some of the loopholes. There's other things going on citywide, such as the pending short-term home sharing ordinance that will prohibit, or as it's currently written, would prohibit doing any short-term renting in RSO units. There's other enforcement actions that the department is currently conducting as far as short-term renting, especially in LS units that have been removed for LS. We have a special unit that investigates short-term rentals in RSO units or where they're not permitted. And we're working with the city attorney with those. We have referred some.
Take LS off and RSOs off the plate of possible short-term rentals.
Yes, the proposed ordinance would do that. And currently, under existing law, we're looking at reports and complaints that we get, especially where properties have been removed through Ellis. And then there are reports that they are being rented short-term. That is not allowed, and so we are working and gathering evidence and working with the city attorney on several cases like that.
Members, Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions based on some of the testimony that we got, and I appreciate everybody coming out. This business of people reporting that their apartment's being rented and they were wrongfully evicted or asked to move or whatever, and there being little enforcement or enforcement that is so delayed it's effectively no enforcement from the point of view of the tenant. What's your experience with that phenomena? Is that often? Is that the exception to the rule? how long does it take to come up with a remedy in this situation?
The problem with those cases is that the tenant has already moved. So they've gone through the inconvenience of having to uproot their situation. We hear testimony about this in public settings like this. We don't get that many actual complaints from tenants who have been affected. Again, usually the affected tenant is gone. We have looked into some. We will take a complaint on that and investigate it. Then the problem is trying to gather the evidence that the units are actually being rented, because it's not illegal to occupy it. And sometimes it could be occupied, for instance, by a family member or something like that. It's illegal to accept rent for it. So that is harder to prove. But if we can gather the evidence, that would be something that we would refer to the city attorney.
And how long does it typically take on the cases that you do get? So it seems like it shouldn't take a long time, because you just said you don't get that many.
It's not a matter of how long it takes. It's gathering sufficient evidence that they're renting.
Well, it matters to the tenant how long it takes for it to be resolved one way or another. If I'm a tenant and I'm waiting, like you said, if I'm not living in a place, it taking a month to let me know you're not getting it back no matter what, or you are getting it back, a month versus 3 months versus 6 months makes a huge difference.
It's not within our available remedies to put the tenant back. The tenant doesn't, that's not an available remedy in this situation.
So, however it's adjudicated and whatever the remedy is, how long does it typically take?
Well, an investigation might take 45 days, 60 days. That's a typical investigative time.
And then the tenant finds out. What I'm trying to do is get you to think about this from the point of view of the tenant. If I'm the tenant, when do I get how long does it take me to get resolution, and what's the resolution? How is the resolution like to materially impact me?
There's no remedy for the tenant who was wrongfully evicted. There's no way that we can put them back. It would be through the criminal prosecution of the landlord.
Okay, so how long does that take?
So in the housing department, we would probably take 60 to 90 days to refer it to the city attorney, and then the city attorney would make a decision about whether to pursue that.
And just in a given year, how many of those do we have?
Very few.
So this is a crime that we have that is almost never committed in LA, or never prosecuted.
It's not easy to prove that. We have tried, but sometimes the people that are living there may be cooperating with the landlord, and there's only that I can think of 1 or 2 cases. But to get if the occupants deny that they're paying rent, it's very difficult to get evidence that's sufficient to prosecute the property owner.
Presumptions.
Yeah. It's actually not hard to find out if somebody's getting compensation for a unit. I don't know that the law allows that to be done, but it's easy to chase to track down whether or not an owner is receiving money every month.
It hasn't been easy for our investigators.
Okay,
right?
We've got some crafty people in LA apparently. I would just offer this comment, gentlemen of the committee, and this is an issue that admittedly I haven't studied a whole lot, but I sit in this committee and we hear this over and over and over again, and I would just posit, Mr. Chair, that I think the onus is upon us to figure out what kind of city we want to live in, and what kind of laws we're going to enforce, and what kind of laws we're not going to enforce. So, as an example, when someone doesn't pay rent, the ownership class has a real handy remedy. It's called eviction, and it's not hard to access, right? The pathway to figuring out whether or not someone's paying rent or not no one would sit in front of a desk and say, well, I can't tell if the person's paying rent or not. That wouldn't happen. It'd be ridiculous. And I think it should be just as ridiculous when it comes to the laws that protect the tenant. And so, I know that takes a variety of steps. We can't do it all through this. We can only do a little bit through this. But I think this is something we've got to stay on if we want to be indeed a just city for people who are not on the ownership side of real estate, but on the rental side, which is most of us.
Paul or Mr. Kretz or
Yeah, I would just make a general comment. As much as we do locally, the bottom line issue is that Ellis had an arguable purpose when it was first implemented.
Yes.
Strong rent control was in place. Some mom and pop landlords especially were losing money. It was a way not to force them to lose money. Now it's just a tool for developers to buy properties, assert that they aren't making money on them, and flip them, turn them into condos after demolishing them. And there's some like Wiseman that make that their purpose of their existence. Ultimately, there's no legitimate purpose for it. It's virtually not used for its original purpose. It's virtually used exclusively as a way to destroy RSO properties, particularly historic properties, and replace them with high market rate housing. And we have to work with the state legislature to get them to realize we're losing a huge percentage of our affordable housing, and at some point we'll have none of it using this process. And we have to be more aggressive in addressing it at the state level. I believe Mark Leno's first effort was to require that a property owner own the property for 5 years before they could use the Ellis Act. I think that's very appropriate. As I recall, his legislation only would have applied to San Francisco, which probably didn't generate a whole lot of interest outside of San Francisco. But I think if the cities where incredibly high, unaffordable rents are becoming the norm got together and addressed this, I think it would be appropriate, and we should. And frankly, organizations that represent landlords should be representing them as landlords and not as property owners that can sell to a buy and flip developer who will just demolish their property and turn it into something less affordable. So I think that has to be our primary focus while we work on using the abilities that we have to make this city address the issue in as restrictive a way as possible.
So, Mr. City Attorney, we're going to need your help in helping us. You heard both statements. How we reconcile that and construct policy, legal policy that as Mr. Harris Dawson said, it's very clear of the remedies for the landlord, as cumbersome as they can at times be, but the landlord has the power of the eviction. What we're looking for is the power of staying for the tenant for abuses of the Ellis Act. And so there are some aspects here that we see with respect to clarifying where an owner has demolished RSO units but did not previously comply with the requirements set forth in the city's Alice provisions. All replacements units are subject to RSO. So that protects or defines the units, but we're not protecting the specific tenants that were abused as a product of that, and that's what we're looking for.
Understood, Councilmember. There are provisions within the state code that could be instituted into to our further provisions
incorporated.
to our current LAMC that, such as, I believe, certain individuals raised already the 10 years right of first refusal. There is, of course, we can look into other potential enforcement provisions, but again, it just comes down to that balancing act between what essentially is already provided in the state code and that whatever is instituted is not deemed by a court to be in conflict. So we can investigate per direction from council. And
it seems that, well, obviously, I think, not to speak for the committee, but to speak for the committee, it seems like that is our interest, and to the extent that it exists, already existing in the code, then it seems that we need to figure out how to move that further up so that it's recognized, acknowledged, and then that becomes the subject of the enforcement, and that we are focused, we become tenant focused when there's been abuse. I mean, I think that's the point that the council's concerned about. Alice is the law, and we respect that. But our focus is on the abuse of the law and its impact on tenants, maintaining their rights as tenants, including their right to return when there's been that abuse.
Understood.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. You guys ready to go forward? Yeah. Okay. Recommendation is to adopt the ordinance. We know that there's part 2 that's going to come back, but at this moment, to adopt the ordinance and accompanying, easy for you to say, adopt ordinance and the additional environmental findings. Instruct the planning department in consultation with the city attorney to report back to the next meeting of the committee with recommendations in response to the 5 bulleted items listed on page 10 of Housing Department's April 2016 report. And of course, what was just commented on. Is that good? Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Mr. Koretz?
Good.
Good. Okay, colleagues, without objection? Okay. Okay, good to go.
That concludes the agenda.
That includes the agenda. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.